Welcome to week 2 of our Rise quilting class. Last week we did lots of cutting of our 5-inch squares, and this week we're gonna sew them together. We're sewing! Yay! So let's get started. All right, so I have 2 stacks here. One of my brightly colored squares and the other of my light colored squares. So what we're going to do is we're gonna take one of the bright and one of the light, and we're gonna set them on top of one another, right sides together. So you know how fabric has a right side and a wrong side? The right side is generally more vibrant and the wrong side is more muted. We want ours to be right side together. So we want the bright, vibrant sides to be facing one another. Then we're gonna take a pencil and our ruler, and with the pencil, you're going to draw a line from the corner to the other corner. And I don't usually use a pencil when working on projects because it doesn't always wash out, but we're going to eventually cut down this line. So it'll disappear, we'll cut it away. Then I'm gonna take a couple of pins. I'm gonna pin them together. And that one's done. So I'm gonna add that to my completed stack. I'm gonna take another dark and light fabric, place them together with the right sides facing one another. Use my ruler to draw a diagonal line with my pencil from corner to corner. And pin. So you're going to do this for each of your squares. And eventually, you'll have a big old stack of pinned together squares with a line down the middle. And once you have all those, we're gonna go to our sewing machine. All right, now that you've drawn a line from corner to corner and you've pinned, we are going to sew 2 straight seams, 1/4 of an inch on either side of that pencil line. And we could do them all individually, square by square, but I'm here to tell you that there is a faster, there is an easier, and there is a better way, and I will show you now. In order to do this as easily and as quickly as possible, we are going to sew one long seam on one side of the pencil marking on all of our squares. So let's do that, because I know that can be kind of hard to understand. You're gonna line up this pencil seam to the edge of your presser foot, and that's 1/4 of an inch. If you're using a different presser foot, you just want to sew 1/4 of an inch away from that pencil line that we made. So let's do our seam. We're gonna backstitch at the end and at the beginning of each square. Okay, so now I've done one. Oops. I'm going to get the other one and just make a continuous seam. We're not going to cut our threads. Stitch. Back stitching. That's my daughter. just gonna do that until you get one really long stretch. And then once you've done all of your squares, you're gonna take your long strip of squares that are sewn on one side, and you're gonna go to the other side. You're gonna flip it around and do a 1/4 inch seam on the other side. Back stitching. And back stitching. Back stitch. So you'll do that until you've got all of your squares with seams on either side of that pencil line. Now that you have a long line of these squares all attached with these 2 seams, you're going to snip them apart. And take out all your pins. You don't need those anymore. And either with scissors or with your ruler and your rotary cutter, you're just gonna cut along the pencil line. You can do it that way, or you can use your rotary cutter and slice them that way. So now when you unfold them, you have 2 triangles. And this is a 1/2 square triangle block. That's what you call these. And a lot of different quilting patterns use 1/2 square triangles. So what you'll do now is you'll take all of your squares that you've cut and made into triangles, and you're gonna press them. When you're pressing your squares open, you want to press the seam allowance towards the darker side, like that. So I'm gonna press with my iron. Notice I'm not doing big sweeping motions, because when you do that, you can kind of move your fabric all around, and we just want a press, just to make that seam lie flat. So as you can see, if you flip it over, I've pressed the seam allowance toward the darker side. And you're gonna do this for all of the 1/2 square triangles that you've made. Okay? Once you've pressed all of your squares open, we're going to use our rotary cutter and our ruler and trim them up, trimming off these little guys. Just gonna trim it up to where it's square. Using these lines as a guide. trim away little bits at a time. Actually looks pretty square. Now move on to the next one. And you'll trim up all of your pressed squares. See how this one, it's kind of hard to tell, but this one has a little bit of a wave to it. It's okay if some of yours do. So you're gonna just trim them up. Take care of that wave. So now it's a nice crisp line. Now that all of our half square triangles are pressed and trimmed, we're going to turn them into what is called an hourglass block, which is this over here. And in order to do that, we're going to take our half square triangle block and we're going to cut it down the middle. We're going to make a diagonal cut using our ruler and our rotary cutter. We're going to do that for all, oops, didn't quite go through. Sometimes if you've been cutting a lot with your rotary cutter, your blade can get a little bit dull. And you'll notice in your pack that you picked up, there are some extra blades that you can replace it with. I don't think mine is quite dull yet. I just needed to press down a little bit harder. I'm just gonna trim off those little bits. Okay, so you're gonna cut all of your half squared triangles in half using a diagonal line. And this is where I think it gets really fun because you get to start seeing your table runner take shape. And you can mix and match. Because what we'll do now is we'll take one triangle and you'll partner it up with one of your other triangles. And you'll do that for all of them. You can kind of just mix and match as you like. And you'll want to, let's see, do it to where, you see how this block, if I were to match these two together, I'd have two white sides and two darker sides. I don't want that, so I'm going to use this other one over here so that the white sides are reflecting one another and the darker sides are reflecting one another. And when I found matches that I like, I'm going to put them right side together. So remember, that's the vibrant sides together. And I'm going to pin them. So here's another example where the whites are reflecting each other and the darker sides are reflecting one another. I'll fold it over, right sides together, and pin. And once you've matched and pinned all of those together, we're going to take them to the sewing machine. Now we're back at our sewing machine and we are going to sew a seam along the long edge of our triangle. And like we did before, we're going to sew a chain of these triangles. We're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam, lining up the long edge of the triangle with the edge of your presser foot. Remember to back stitch. And back stitch. Now, we're not going to trim any seams yet. We're just going to start right in on the next triangle. Back stitching. And continuing until you've stitched through all of your triangles. Back stitch. I'm moving the pins as I work because I don't want my needle to go over any pins. That might break my needle. And back stitch until you've got one long chain of triangles. So we've stitched a seam along the long edge of our triangles, and now we're going to clip them apart, open them up, and press them. And that's our last step for this week. This week we've done a little bit more than last week, and next week we won't have quite as much to do either. So don't worry if you are having trouble finishing up everything. That's okay. Take your time. I like quilting because I can just do a little bit at a time. Whenever my daughter is sleeping or I have a moment to myself, I can go and sew and pick up a project where I've left off. But you don't have to do it all at once or feel rushed. So now I've got my hourglass block, and you'll notice that when we sewed these together, we've got some more of these little, dog ears, and we're gonna trim them off. And you can go ahead and do that. You can do that with your scissors if you like. Just trim those guys off. And repeat until all of your blocks are pressed open. And make a cool little stack, trimming as you go. And that's it for week 2. Y'all are doing wonderful.